Hello and welcome to Prime Time, Prime Investors webinar series, talking about all things money, stock market, mutual funds, bonds, ETFs, and whatnot. In the past, we have conducted about 4 or 5 webinars. Our first one was about term insurance, and then we had a premium webinar about mutual fund portfolio design. And we followed that up with a ETF webinar, and then we had an open house Q&A kind of webinar. Today's webinar is going to be different from all those. And today's webinar is going to be how to design your own stock portfolio, how to design your own direct equity portfolio. Interest in the stock markets has literally skyrocketed over the last year, ever since the COVID pandemic landed on our shores. We have been growing, the number of demat accounts in the country, the volumes of trade volumes that are happening in the market. They all have gone up, and that shows a very strong preference, at least for now, a very strong preference amongst Indian investors to invest directly in stock market. Investing directly in the stock market is a very interesting and potentially profitable thing to do for investors. However, it is not trivial, nor is it very easy. There are many things that we should be very cognizant about, and a lot of cautionary planning needs to be done before we get into the stock market and while we are operating, or while we are investing in the stock market using direct stocks. How to go about doing this? How to keep yourself safe while you are going for the profits from direct stock investing? This is going to be the topic that Aarti Krishnan is going to be presenting on today. We will have this webinar as we always do in 2 parts. We will initially have a 40-45 minute presentation from Aarti Krishnan, and then we'll have a Q&A session, which will be taken on by both Aarti Krishnan and Vidya Bala. Please note that we will not be taking questions about specific stocks. No questions about, please, no questions about whether this stock is good, whether this stock is a buy at this level, at this price, where should I sell this stock? All that stuff will not be taking specific stock related questions. This webinar is about how to be safe and how to build a sound equity market portfolio for long-term investors. That's the theme of this webinar. And I request you to keep your questions around this theme or around the material that Aarti is going to be presenting. With these few words, let me recede to the background and welcome Aarti Krishnan. Aarti Krishnan is no stranger to Prime Investor audience. I'm sure you've read many of her essays both in Prime Investor and outside of Prime Investor. She is somebody who has been helping investors in various forms and using various channels for decades now. And she is a pretty astute stock market investor as well. And so we look forward to hearing from her as to how to put together a winning stock portfolio. Over to you, Aarti. So whenever I say over to somebody, there'll be a little bit of, mechanizations that will be going on to mute us and unmute and things like that. Please bear with us. We'll get started right now. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I hope I'm audible to all of you. Thank you for having me on this webinar, and thank you all of you for sparing time on a Saturday morning to attend a webinar, which is also 1.5 hours long. So if you ask me whether I'm an expert on building a stock portfolio, my answer would be no, actually, because if I'd really been really an accomplished person at building a wonderful stock portfolio, I would probably be in the leagues of Rakesh Jhunjhunwala or somebody, right? But the expertise that I can claim is that I have observed the stock markets from the front lines for over 2.5 decades now. So when I just started out on my career in 94, 95, that was just the start of the dot-com bubble, as it later came to be known. And I saw that boom bust phase of 99, 2000, 2001 play out. Thereafter, again, I saw a bull market and a bear one between 2003 and 2008. And now we have the latest bull run. So I think being through these three market cycles, it has given me a number of learnings about what are the safeguards that one should have in place while constructing a stock portfolio, and how one can make a reasonable success out of and build net worth out of investing directly in equities. So the other claim to fame, that if I may call it that, is that as I've tracked the Indian mutual fund industry right from 1995, I've had the opportunity to interact with some of the best fund managers in India over the many cycles and many years. And what I follow as an investment strategy, or what I write today in Prime Investor, is a lot of distilled wisdom and derived knowledge from all these interactions that I've had over the years with these brilliant fund managers who have delivered a track record over 20 or 25 years. Now, without much ado, let me get on with my presentation. When most people actually start on their stocks portfolio, they go about it on a one-off basis. So, people have heard of some friend or an acquaintance or a neighbor who's made a lot of money on stocks, or they listen to a television channel and they think, okay, let me buy these stocks, right? But whereas if you want to go about building a portfolio in a very systematic way over the long term, actually you need to follow a very, very process oriented approach for it. It is somewhat like using a set of Lego blocks to build something very creative, and each piece actually has to fit in well into the overall structure. So that's why I've called it the basic building blocks. So the first step to actually building a successful portfolio is to know your objectives, right? So why are you starting on the stock portfolio in the first place? Is it just for the fun and the excitement of it? Obviously not. If most of us want to build a stock portfolio, it is for some specific objective. Maybe you want to become a dollar millionaire. Maybe you want to have $10 million to your name at some point in time, even early in your career. Maybe you want to have a passive dividend income. Now, I see on social media, many people nurse this ambition of actually having a large enough stock portfolio to get dividends that can sustain them every year, right? Or your ambitions could be more modest, and you're just sick of these very low FD returns that don't even match inflation, and therefore you're looking to build an equity portfolio that can deliver these FD plus returns, right? Now, why do you have to know your objectives before you start? Because that will determine the kind of portfolio that you want to build for yourself. If you want to become a dollar millionaire, for example, you may want to own a lot of stocks which are earnings compounders and can really deliver very decent growth or stock price appreciation to you over the years. If you want to get passive dividend income, you need to go in the opposite direction, and you will actually have to own stocks which are high dividend yield paying, which are mature businesses and can be expected to sustain their dividend payouts over the years. If your aim is just an FD plus return, actually, you should be questioning whether you need a direct stock portfolio at all. Perhaps you should be making do with an index fund or a multi-cap fund investment, which can deliver your FD plus return with far less involvement on your part than a direct stock portfolio will require. Now, having decided why you want to build a stock portfolio, the second thing is, of course, fixing your horizon, right? So, you need to decide whether you want to build a stock portfolio in order to meet a certain target date goal. For example, you may just have an infant daughter and you think that when she becomes 18 years old, you want to fund her college education, and you want to save up something like 30-35 lakhs. That could be one goal. Or your goal could be quite open-ended and you just want long-term wealth creation. You want to become richy rich in the long term through your stock portfolio. Now, you may be having all kinds of other investments such as mutual funds, bonds, your EPF, PPF and all that. But you would like your stock portfolio to be the icing on the cake and to create riches for you over the long run, right? So, your horizon needs to be very clear in your mind. One thing I can definitely tell you is, though people tell you that you can invest in stocks with a 3-year horizon or a 5-year horizon, it simply doesn't work that way. The typical market cycle in India, an up and down cycle, typically takes 7 years. Therefore, if you're investing in stocks, especially direct stocks, it is best to have a horizon which is at least a minimum of 7 years away from the current date. A second thing which decides your horizon is whether you start out in a bull market or in a bear market. For people who've been in the markets for the last decade or so, they'll know that if they got started into stocks in 2008 or 2007, when the previous bull market was at its peak, it took more than 7 years for them to get to even a single digit return and then go on to the double digits. This is why I'm saying that you need a minimum 7 to 10 year horizon to actually build a stock portfolio. If you're starting out in a bull market, you need to have a longer horizon in mind, typically 7 years plus. If you're starting out after a steep correction, you can expect returns within a short timeline, though the timeline can be quite hard to predict. A third factor that should decide whether you want to dabble in stocks or not is the time and skill that you would be able to devote to this exercise. Now, managing a direct stock portfolio needs a lot of tracking and constant tracking and vigilance. Without this, you cannot hope to make a lot of money from stocks. This is because apart from business changes, constantly there are governance risks, regulatory risks, macro risks, a variety of things that are playing out and affecting the prices of the stocks you own. Now, from my own personal experience, I'll tell you, in the initial years when I started out as a research analyst, 95 onwards, I used to invest in stocks a little bit. Afterwards, I found that when I was writing in the paper, there were very strict rules as to where not investing and there could be a conflict of interest. So I actually moved my portfolio into mutual funds. Later, when I moved out of a full-time role, I thought of actually taking up direct stock investing again. But the first decision I needed to make is how much time I can devote to this exercise. I found that if you're juggling 2 or 3 jobs or you work in a very, very harrowing kind of a profile where you're spending 12 to 14 hours at work, you simply cannot spare the time really to be an active stock investor. Now, the market opportunities that allow you to create wealth, they do not come with any advance notice. So the day when you're busy at work or day you have a board meeting, that may be the day when the market bottoms out and you have wonderful opportunities to buy your favorite stocks. So if the approach that I have found that works really well is that to get out of this problem of missing opportunities, it is better to have a core portfolio made up of mutual funds, equity mutual funds and index funds, which can take care of your need to have equities in your portfolio. On top of that, it is good to layer a direct stock portfolio, because in that portfolio, even if you go in and out, you miss out some opportunities, it won't matter, because your core MF portfolio, which is into equities, will be able to capitalize on this opportunities. So do factor this time and skill factor before you decide to embark on your journey of direct stock investing. The second thing you need to fix, not immediately, but at least over time, is the style that you prefer while making your stock investments. One thing I've learned over the years is that styles are actually hardwired into people. Now, some people, even in their daily life, are bargain seekers, right? They would go and they would basically buy whatever is available cheap in a shop, and they would look for discounts and things like that. Others are quite brand conscious. They are willing to pay any amount of premium and any amount of money if they think that they are going to own a great brand. Similarly, even in stock market investing, there are differences between value and growth investors. So value investing is where the price and the valuation is your primary consideration while selecting a stock. If a bull market is raging all around you, you don't mind sitting out that entire market because you feel the prices or valuations are irrational. Value investors typically buy stocks with a lot of earnings uncertainty. They don't look for everything to be perfect and visible before they buy a stock. To be a value investor, you need to actually have a strong bottom-up understanding of a sector and a business, because you will need to take a view that is different from that of the consensus. A second thing you will need to do is to hold cash, because in markets, you often have long bull markets when the valuations make no sense or they are irrational, and the stock that you want to buy may not meet your valuation bar, so you will need to hold cash. A second type of investing style that I have come across is actually contrarian investing. So here you deliberately look for others to be pessimistic about some stock or sector, and you try to see whether you can arrive at a different opinion on the stock in order to buy it when it is beaten down. Now, a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, if you remember, there was this doomsday predictions doing the rounds about IT stocks in India, right? Everybody said these guys are can only do application development. These guys cannot do anything which is with the new digital economy requires. So Indian IT companies will die a slow death. These were the kind of predictions. From that point, actually, IT stocks have given you nearly 100% return. So for people who can take a slightly contrary opinion on a stock or a sector, uh, when the stock gets beaten down due to the pessimism of our others, actually you can swoop in and make a lot of money. But contrarian investing needs an ability to think differently from the consensus. Shankaran Narayan of ICICI Pru is actually a well-known contrarian investor. And this is what he had said to me in an interview a few years ago. He said equity. So I asked him at that time, the India's GDP was growing very slowly. So I asked him, what should we do? Should one hold gold or bonds? He said, the time when the GDP growth is slow, when there is a slowdown, when there is pessimism, that is the best time to buy equities. When everybody is optimistic about the economy and businesses, that is a time to buy gold. So that's contrarian thinking for you. Then you have something called special situations investing, where basically the Indian market is actually far from efficient. If you've been in the markets for a while, you'll know there are a number of mispricing opportunities in the market. So when open offers, takeovers, mergers, demergers, etc., happen, often stocks tend to react in extreme ways, and these offer opportunities for you to swoop in on good stocks and to own them. But to take advantage of special situations investing, you need to really track corporate actions very, very closely and need to know corporate history in India to a large extent. Finally, there is growth investing, which is the most popular style of today, where you simply buy companies with earnings and growth visibility. You look for companies which you think can deliver the sustainable earnings growth over the next few years. You don't bother too much about the valuation or pricing of these stocks. You look at the growth first and foremost. So, to actually practice growth investing efficiently, you need to be able to model a company's future growth quite well without too many errors, and then see whether the current valuation can actually still make for a buy. So it needs strong modeling and DCF valuation skills. So Axis Mutual Fund is a well-known mutual fund in this growth investing and quality investing. So this is what Chandresh Nigam, who is the CEO of the fund, has said about quality investing. By quality investing, Axis mainly looks for businesses with sustainable pricing power. So whenever there's a raw material increase or whenever there is other kinds of cost increases for the company, they should be able to effortlessly pass it on to consumers. That is what constitutes pricing power. And quality investors look for these kind of these kind of features: sustainable pricing power, moat, engagement with consumers, strong brands, basically attributes that the other companies in the sector cannot easily replicate. So finally, there is a style which is much in vogue today. In a trending bull market, actually momentum investing does tend to get very popular. So this is why you have so many practitioners of technical analysis today, and people, even a normal fundamental investor actually today quotes things like 200 DMA and all this. So this is basically a sign that in a bull market, momentum investing works really well. What is momentum investing? You ignore stocks which the market is actually putting out of favor, and you go after the stocks which the market is actually favoring at the moment. So usually momentum investing does mix in some amount of technical analysis, and index investing in a way is momentum investing, because the index committee keeps adding to the weightages in the stocks and the sectors that are doing well in a bull market, right? So when choosing your style, it may actually take many, many years to identify the style you're comfortable with. Once you're comfortable with a particular style, don't simply switch out of it because you've lost faith in it. Now, recently we've seen that certain mutual fund houses have been underperforming in the Indian markets for the last 5 years or so, because growth and quality investing have been so much in vogue and value investing has been out of favor. So there was a lot of bashing happening of Prashant Jain and even Naren a couple of years ago. But you see that with the bounce back in PSU stocks, their funds have also shown some improvement in performance. So when market cycles turn, the kind of style that outperforms tends to change too. Therefore, you should stick to one style and not keep hopping between styles, because the moment you hop, that new style may stop performing. Now, third question, and one that is quite top of mind for investors, is what is the ideal number of stocks in the portfolio? Now, without going into all kinds of academic studies, let me tell you, it is usually 12 stocks to 30 stocks. So, in order to decide on your sector weights, you make sure that you own a number of stocks which is between 12 and 30 in your portfolio. So, having decided on the number of stocks, how do you work on the sector weights? So, typically, the best investors actually do not pay much attention to picking stocks from a particular sector, but they do keep an eye on the overall sector weights in the portfolio. How does this happen? For example, if you see a few years ago, nobody in the market was actually tracking chemical stocks, and nobody was tracking something pressure cooker stocks or consumer appliance stocks. However, today, if you look back at the multi-baggers of the last 10 years, many of the consumer appliance stocks, specialty chemical stocks, TTK Prestige, these kind of stocks come to the top, right? So, if you are following a very sector-specific approach, where you said that in my portfolio, I will have a 20% weight to capital goods, I'll have a 30% weight to infrastructure, I'll have a 20% weight to IT, and so on, you would have missed out on many of these multi-bagger opportunities over the last 10 years. This is why I'm saying it is better to select your stocks based on a bottom-up process, and then make sure that no sector becomes too big a weight in your portfolio. For example, today Indian indices have 40% plus weights in the financial sector. I find that to be quite risky, because financials is a very high beta sector, and I would maintain a much lower weight in that particular sector. So, how do you decide on your diversification? How do you decide on the mix of sectors and stocks that you own? Try to own stocks and companies which have different business drivers. So, if you're owning some FMCG stocks or consumer appliance stocks which are purely an India play, also try to include some stocks which are purely global plays, say IT stocks or some pharma exporters. Similarly, if you have stocks which are totally pegged to the core economy, like metal stocks or steel or power, then you should also counterbalance it with some stocks or sectors which are not much affected by economic growth or degrowth, say like FMCG, right? So, when diversifying, don't just go by numerical weights and things like that. Try to understand the nature of the businesses that you own, and try to own a mix of companies and sectors with different drivers. Now, how can you set your individual stock weights? I found two factors contribute to your individual stock weights. One is your conviction level. The better you know the company and the more convinced you are that its long-term prospects are great, the more can be your stock weight in that particular company. Now, the second way in which you can constitute your stock weights is on their risk characteristics. Now, for most stocks which have historical data relating to their beta, relating to their standard deviation, volatility, even if you go to our prime stocks module, you will find that wherever we've listed stocks in our watch list or buy list, there are actually volatility measures and risk measures that are captured. So, if you want to make your portfolio to be not very, to not suffer a very bumpy ride in choppy markets, you can basically have higher weights in low risk stocks or less volatile stocks, and lower weights in high beta stocks and highly volatile stocks. Now, one thing I've learned from professional investors or from people who really made it big in the markets is that once they like a stock, they don't just go and bet their shirt on it. They start small. They build a very small position in their portfolio. They could start with a 0.5% position or 0.25% position, and slowly, as the company starts delivering to their expectations, they add to their positions over the years, right? Over the years. Now, most of us, having identified a stock, we are very, very anxious to buy it immediately. The moment it dips, actually, we say, okay, let us acquire more of it. Or the moment it starts rising, we get a FOMO feeling and we feel we should buy more of it before it runs up, right? But these are amateur investor mistakes that we must avoid. and we should actually be very clear about the prices at which we'll acquire a stock. We should acquire a stock position in very, very small doses, and if possible over many years. As an aside, I just wanted to share with you how Anup Bhaskar, who's a very well-known mid-cap investor, he used to be with Sundaram, and the Sundaram mid-cap fund's great performance came during his stint. After that, he was with UTI managing he was their CIO and also managing their mid-cap funds. So this is one kind of investing that he favors. So he feels that instead of, if you've identified a sector which is going to do very well, instead of trying to identify one winning stock in the sector, you go ahead and acquire 3 or 4 of the top stocks in that sector. Over time, you will find that one stock turns out a real winner, and then you can discard the others. So he calls this the heart style of investing. So in a heart, which is a Hindi word, basically in Delhi, you have a heart, right? Where people from different states and different tribes, etc., come and display their wares there. So one shop you will find it will be selling jeans, and one shop may have a combination of bags and chappals, and one shop will be having food items. So and the seller hopes that if one thing doesn't sell, the other thing will sell, right? So Anup Bhaskar says that in the heart style of investing, you try to own a little bit of everything in the hope that the market will one day recognize what you own, right? So he gave an example of tire companies where he thought tire was a good sector to play at a particular point in time due to macro factors, and he bought 3 or 4 tire stocks at a 2 to 2.5% weight each. And then one of those stocks really clicks, and then you start slowly paring your exposure in the other stocks. So as investors, if we are very convinced about a sector, or we really know a sector very deeply but don't know which stock to pick, this is a style of investing that we can practice. A fourth and important and slightly contrarian point I'd like to make is that for retail investors, it makes every sense not to take too much cognizance of this market cap based categorization while buying stocks. Now, today, the MF industry's categorization of equity funds is based wholly on this market cap based categorization, right? But that is because fund managers, as they manage humongous funds, have various constraints. Every time they try to build a position or liquidate a position, it may affect the market because of impact costs, etc., liquidity problems. But as retail investors, there's no need for us to worry because we are not Tatas and Birlas who are going to buy multi-crore positions, right? So I think we shouldn't pay too much attention to this market cap and try to own large caps and not try to own small caps, etc. We should just go by the underlying business and try to pick the ones which look the most attractive. I think it's a myth that large cap companies have great governance and they are less volatile than small caps and things like that. That is simply not true. From a business perspective, if you see, there are many sectors in India which are only represented in the small and mid cap space. They are not even present in the large cap space. The other thing that the belief that only large caps have good governance also has been disproven many times. If you look at Mr. Balakrishnan's recent article on governance, you will find mention of many large cap names in that particular article, right? So it is not as if large cap companies are all holy and small cap ones need to be chore companies. Yes, you do have to apply governance filters with small and mid cap companies, but you have to do it with large caps as well. So there's one reason why I'm saying you should stay market cap agnostic. Today, if you look at any study of the multi-bagger returns over the last 10 years, these are the kind of sectors that will crop up. You will see specialty chemicals, agrochemicals, ceramic tiles, even a couple of fertilizer names. Now, 10 years ago, if you asked any sell-side analyst or brokerage analyst, what are the sectors he's tracking, these sectors would not have been on the radar of any such analyst. Okay. So these stocks were all only in the small cap or mid cap space. They were not figuring in the indices or they were not figuring in the large cap names at all. Yet these have proved multi-baggers, right? This is why I'm saying it is better to be market cap agnostic while choosing your stocks and run your filters purely based on the numbers that the company is able to generate. Thereafter, you can start looking at the sector and the company's position within the sector. So some stocks with extremely good market shares and margins and pricing power do feature in India's small cap universe also. They need not be owned by NMFs. They need not have high institutional holdings. If your stock portfolio supplements an MF portfolio that you already have, there is an even greater case for staying out of your index names and large cap names, because already all your funds will be holding the HDFCs and the ITCs and the HULs and the HDFC banks. So there's no point in you also going and replicating those holdings. So it makes sense to look outside of the index names for your stock picks. So I couldn't help but recall this movie Ratatouille, which is one of the favorite movies of mine. It is basically about, if you've not seen the movie, it is about how there's a French restaurant with a very incompetent cook. That guy really doesn't like cooking also at all. It's a young fellow. So there is a rat living in the sewers, and the rat is really passionate about cooking. And that rat actually, the journey of that rat into a great cook, which manages to actually bring diners in great numbers to the French restaurant. So that is the story. So in that story, actually, there is this quote: not everybody can become a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere. So just like that, not every company may become a great wealth creator, but a great wealth creator can come from anywhere. It can be across the universe, irrespective of market cap. So a final thing, and a sort of a cliche you hear from fund managers usually is, time in the market is more important than timing the market. Now, I don't think you should apply that too universally when you're picking stocks. When you're owning a direct stock portfolio, actually, lion's share of your gains and returns over the long term actually come from good timing of your buys and sells. So if I look back at my own stock portfolio today, the positions with the best returns and the ones which I'm most proud of and the ones which I wish I had invested more in are the ones I had bought in October 2008 and March 2009 in the market lows. Similarly, stocks that all of us have bought in the March lows recently, March 2020, I'm sure they've delivered better returns than some of our multi-year holdings. So let us not delude ourselves that timing is not important in the stock market. It is pretty important. Of course, you need not be a perfect timer. So you need not catch the exact market bottom in order to win big in the stock market. As long as you're willing to buy when there is panic and when there is a sharp correction, that should be good enough. You should also remember that the market may bottom at a particular time, but different stocks and sectors can bottom at different times. I did mention the IT example. Some 3 years ago, there was such overarching gloom about the Indian IT sector, and many IT stocks were available at multi-year lows, Infosys, etc. Had you acquired them then, you would have a 3-digit return to show today. Similarly, a year ago, there was a pervasive pessimism about auto stocks. There was this feeling that electric vehicles will completely take over their business and there was no future for a Maruti or a Hero Honda. Hero Honda actually went to a mouth-watering PE at that time. So at times like that, actually, if you're able to have cash ready and swoop in on very good companies, definitely you can make huge gains, and that can make a huge difference to your long-term portfolio. One thing you should know in order to take advantage of such opportunities is that when markets correct, most people will be predicting that it will fall further. So in March also, when we saw the market fall by, I think, 30% or so, most people were saying, oh, this will be like the 2008 crash when the market fell 54%. This is the beginning of the end. This is the bubble popping, etc. So you will hear such talk around you. You should learn to ignore it a bit and acquire the companies that you like. Of course, when markets correct, it is always possible they can correct further, right? So even a stock which has fallen 90% can fall another 99%, right? So you should be very clear about what you're going to buy at times like this. And when the bears actually strike, it can be a very, very difficult situation to actually step in and buy. And instead of letting emotions take over at that time, it helps to have a watch list of stocks that you always wanted to buy, and buy one of those stocks when they correct. Don't go buying all kinds of penny stocks in the hope of getting rich quick at such moments, right? So having a watch list and creating a watch list of stocks that you always wanted to own in a bull market when you're in a more optimistic frame of mind can help you actually identify the right stocks and act very quickly when a crash comes. Now, this is a point I wanted to make because on Twitter and other social media, I think one trend that is really prevalent today is that of following the stock tips given out by various star investors. there are also many fan sites and blogs, etc., dedicated to following the moves of, say, a Rakesh Jhunjhunwala or a Vijay Kedia or a Dolly Khanna or even a Sankaran Narayan or a Prashant Jain, right? But I generally find that following a Rakesh Jhunjhunwala or Dolly Khanna in terms of simply buying the stocks that they buy or following their moves is tends to be very bad for your overall portfolio returns. This is because there are very solid reasons why I'm saying you don't be a copycat. Firstly, you don't know if they're buying a stock just as a short-term trade or a long-term investment. I have known some of the RJ acquisitions to be short-term acquisitions. So he knows of a specific opportunity or a corporate action that can actually lead to that is mispriced in the market, and he buys it and he sells it immediately. So if you follow him in, you may not know when to exit that stock, right? Secondly, when a person accumulates net worth going into 300 crore or 400 crore, they can afford to make pretty big mistakes with their stock purchases or sales. You cannot afford it with your limited net worth. So, without knowing a person's, a star investor's net worth or their annual income or their position size, if you end up copying their high risk moves, you can end up with your fingers burnt. The third thing I found is that these very successful investors have actually got there by obviously by being very, very smart and smarter than most of us. So they often release news of their purchasing a stock or initiating a position well after they have done it, right? So people like to track the stock exchange disclosures on bulk deals or this quarterly shareholding pattern to see which big investor has acquired 1%, etc. So many of these large investors are quite wise, and what they do is they keep their positions at 0.9% or less than the regulatory threshold for a long time until they can have conviction. Once they have conviction, they buy more of it, and then the entire horde of retail investors follow them into the stock, right? So it definitely suits them to have more investors piling on, because then their stock can deliver high returns more than what they expected also. So you also don't know what are the risk management techniques that these super investors use. They may be using position sizes, they may have hedged portfolios, they may have only a 20% equity allocation, and unless you follow all that, you cannot be following their stock moves blindly. It is also possible, let us not forget, in the Indian market, insider info is quite widely shared. And today you have aids like WhatsApp and SMS and all sorts of things helping people share stock specific info. And therefore, larger investors do have access to a larger pipeline of privileged info than you or I. So they may be buying a stock for a specific reason, and you may not know that reason for which they are buying it, right? Finally, one thing I found is if you follow a big investor and buy a stock, that is not enough. What really creates wealth in the long term is your ability to hold the stock through a lot of events and corporate actions later. So if you buy a stock based on borrowed conviction, then the company goes and announces a few quarters of very poor earnings, or the stock goes through a steep correction, or you suddenly hear of promoter pledging or something, then you will feel like losing conviction and selling the stock because you were not very convinced about buying it in the first place. So it's very important that you know the reasons for buying the stock, which are original to you, and you are not simply following in the footsteps of somebody who is you're simply going by their track record and their portfolio returns. So here, just for fun, I listed some big name stock bets that have backfired badly. So Rakesh Jhunjhunwala did own DHFL. He did own A to Z Engineering, which was an IPO stock that fell by 90%. And he did buy Jaiprakash Associates. This doesn't mean that these stocks are suitable bets for you and me or retail investors, because he may not have minded burning his fingers on a few positions, having made it big on a few, or he may have sold these stocks also at the right time. We know that Porinju Veliath of Equity Intelligence, he's created huge wealth through his PMS, has had a few bad small cap bets. So Lloyd Electric was one of his stocks for which he still trolled on Twitter. It fell by 40-odd%. Prashant Jain is one of the most accomplished and well-regarded fund managers in the Indian MF industry. And he took this call nearly 4 or 5 years ago that PSUs are really undervalued and need to be accumulated. He's owned PNB, PFC, REC, etc. for a long time. And they've really dragged down his portfolio performance, and lot of big bucks he's received for these calls. These calls may still pay off, but the thing is, as retail investors, whether you will be able to hold your conviction after a stock is stand 50% or 60% of after your buy price, right? So in every bull market, there is a new set of Pied Pipers that retail investors like to follow. So be aware of who the Pied Pipers are for this market, and if you want to follow anything, try to understand their investment philosophy and the method through which they buy stocks. Do not try to buy the stocks that they own. If you want to follow these big name investors, look for a multi-cycle track record. Unless a fund manager has been around and has proved himself big in 99, 2000, 2007, 2008 and now, don't think that something that has worked in the last 10 years is sufficient to prove somebody as a great fund manager. Now, having built a stock portfolio, the next step is actually monitoring and reviewing. So, to make money off any stock, it is not the buying or the selling that really matters, but really the holding. Because for much of your investment journey in the stock market, you will only be holding the stocks that you selected, right? So, the following steps make it easy for you to monitor and review your stock portfolio. So when you're buying a stock, first write down your thesis on why you're buying it, so that later you don't get confused on why you bought it, etc. Then keep track of the actual performance, corporate actions, etc. See whether stocks are performing due to your thesis or for reasons outside it. Watch out for governance or business risks that crop up. Do remember that today, what is the definition of quality can change with every cycle. So this slide, I just put it there because today there is this view in the market that coffee can investing works. What is coffee can investing? You just pick up some stocks with high ROE, high ROC, high margin, 15% CAGR, etc., and you put them in your portfolio, and then you forget about it for the next 20 years, and at the end of it, lo and behold, you will have great wealth. Now, this philosophy is something I don't at all believe in, because in every big bull market in the last 3 decades, we've had a different set of stocks named as quality stocks. If you look at this Motilal Oswal wealth creation study of 2001 to 2006, it was the previous bull market, not this one. If you look at the fastest wealth creators in that market, the stocks were Matrix Labs, Kirloskar Brothers, Pantaloon Retail, Aban Offshore, Unitech. I'm sure none of you would think of these stocks as quality stocks or desirable stocks today, right? But they may be desirable stocks today. But I'm saying the market perception of what are desirable stocks, what are quality stocks, changes dramatically with every market cycle. So in the last 10 years, we've believed that consumer-facing stocks are invincible, and that quality stocks means paint stocks and specialty chemical stocks or NBFC stocks. But this can change very well in the next 10 years. So don't go with the impression that your stock portfolio doesn't need tracking. It definitely needs tracking. Now, one common mistake that most retail investors make is that they book profits very early on their profit-making positions, and they fail to cut losses on the loss-making positions. This comes from a common tendency toward behavioral tendency called loss aversion. So what is loss aversion? If you find a loss-making position in your portfolio, you quickly shut down your computer and you pretend it is a long-term holding, because you don't want to admit you made a big mistake, right? If you want to be a successful stock investor, you need to get over that aversion very, very consciously. So how do you do this? Prevention is better than cure. So you can identify good stocks but not buy them immediately. Set a desirable price target at which you will buy and just wait for that price to come. A second thing is, just like traders, even fundamental investors should perhaps set a stop loss for their portfolio positions. So set a Google alert on the price. If the price of a stock you own falls 25 to 30% from your buy price, be open-minded to the possibility that your thesis was wrong, or that the market knows more about the stock than you do, right? So many seasoned investors tell me that If a stock falls 30% below their buy price, they don't even ask questions. They just sell some of their positions. So they'll cut half of their positions and then take a fresh look at the stock. Now, averaging is one of the most harmful amateur investor mistakes all of us make. So when stock falls sharply, do not keep averaging it without understanding why it's falling or whether there is good justification for the fall. Going on social media or going to your relatives' dinner party and boasting about your winners can make it very difficult for you to admit to losers or to get rid of winners when they actually turn turtle. So don't go public with your stock portfolio. This will make it easier to avoid loss aversion. Switching from one stock to another is an easy way to avoid loss aversion. So if you find a huge, deeply loss-making stock which is 80% down, look for a similar price stock or a similar position to acquire which looks more attractive. That will make it easier to sell this loss-making position. Now, loss-making positions can also get you savings in terms of capital gains tax, because today you can set off or carry forward your capital losses from your long-term capital losses from your equity holdings. I'm coming to the final section here. So one of the most important things, people take a lot of care with how they acquire their equity positions and how they buy stocks, but they don't take equal care with actually exiting those positions. So how do you exit your positions? So one trick, one important rule is not to make drastic sell or buy decisions with your entire equity portfolio. So prior to this bull market, there was a belief that actually whenever the Nifty PE crosses 22 times, it becomes a very expensive market. And when the Nifty PE falls below 15 times, it is a cheap market. And many dynamic allocation funds were using this thumb rule. This time, however, this thumb rule has not at all worked, because in February 2015 itself, the Nifty PE crossed 22. And if people sold a good portion of their equity portfolio, then they would have missed out on a 74% upside. So the lesson from this for us is that let us not make very drastic calls to exit all our equity positions because everybody on TV is saying market is overvalued, or people are talking of bubbles all around you. So a good strategy is to fix a band for your equity allocation. You say that 50 to 70% of my portfolio will be in equities. So if you feel the market is really expensive or worried about bubble fears, you keep your equity allocation to 50%. Don't go below that and make very drastic changes to your asset allocation. A second thing that people do is, as soon as a stock goes up 100% or 200%, many people will advise you to just sell it, because bird in hand is worth many in the bush, right? But in the stock market, if you follow this principle as a fundamental investor, you will end up missing out on many long-term profit-making opportunities. Any multi-bagger stock, in order to become a multi-bagger, after all, has to double and treble many times. Just look at the journey of Kotak Mahindra stock. This is the adjusted price. It is not the actual price. It is the price adjusted for splits and bonuses. So between December 2004 and 5 itself, the stock went up more than 4 times. So if an investor said, I got a 400% return and he booked profit on it at that time, just look at what he has missed over the subsequent years. The stock has gone all the way from 47 rupees to 650 rupees by 2015 and 1900 rupees now, right? I'm not saying every stock will be a Kotak Mahindra Bank, but if you've identified a good stock and its business is following the investment thesis that you had set out in the beginning, don't be in a hurry to book profits. Keep track of its valuations rather than looking at the target return part in order to book returns, right? Book profits. So in order to sell a stock, you have to look for fundamental trouble signs like losing market share, contracting revenue, margin pressures. Governance shockers and regulatory risks are, of course, very big red flags to help sell a stock. If you're selling a stock, if you're keen on profit booking on your portfolio, don't stick to profit-making stocks. Look at loss makers first. So if a stock is still loss making after the 6-year bull market, it could very well mean that it was a wrong decision to buy it in the first place. So that should be one of your first candidates for selling out. Finally, don't sell without a plan on how you're going to redeploy this money, right? So if you're going to have goals that are going to come up in 3 to 4 years, yes, great. Then you can definitely sell the stock and keep the money in a safer option where you won't suffer a capital loss. But if you don't have a goal coming up in 3 to 4 years and you just sold because the stock is expensive, or you met your target valuation for the stock, then be clear about whether you will re-enter the stock. If it's a really good stock, you may want to re-enter it for the long term. Be clear about the valuation or the price at which you will re-enter it. Put the money in liquid instruments so that you can pull out the money if there is an opportunity that presents itself. If you sell because of fundamental reasons, wait for buying opportunities in the other stocks on your watch list. So when you have a watch list, also create target buy prices for each stock so that you can redeploy quickly. So finally, to sum up whatever I have basically said across this presentation, the most important quality to create equity wealth is not really intelligence or being smarter than Einstein. It is patience and the ability to think independently of the crowd. So with this, I will wrap up my presentation. A slightly overshot the time.
Hi guys. Thank you, Arati. That was seriously, guys. We've all probably at some point of time read books about equity markets and investing and things like that. What Arati presented today is probably a very hyper condensed version of a book. There are lots of learnings, lots of wisdom in what she presented today. What I would suggest is, this presentation is available in the file section of your chat. You can keep this presentation, and eventually the webinar recording also will be available. I would urge you to go through the recording at least once more and take notes that are relevant to yourself, and help those notes guide you in terms of your investment journey. That would be the best way to derive maximum value and a use from what Arati presented today. With this, I will. There are a whole bunch of questions that we've received over the chat. I will turn over to Vidya to start prioritizing the questions and start answering them between Arati and Vidya. Thank you, Arati, again, and over to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Srikanth. Hello, everybody. That was a great, presentation from Arati, and a lot of learnings for all of us here as well. And I hope it's the case with you too. So I'm going to move to the questions that we have already received from some of you. So between Arati and me, we'll try and cover as much questions as possible in this session. So I'm going to start with a general market question. That will be from Ajay. Ajay wants to know how we can avoid the December 07 to Feb 09 fall. That would allow the end result to be 5x. Do you advise exiting in such mass panic scenarios or re-entering once the mayhem is over? So perhaps, Arati, with all her experience, is quite well placed to take this question. Arati, to you, please.
Yeah, so my take even I used to think this way, that whenever I think there is a bubble or I feel like valuations are too expensive in the market, why not get out of all my stocks and then just wait until things get better? But I have learned in the recent bull market that doing this too early can hurt you so badly. I mean, as I presented in one of the slides, in February 2015, 2016 itself, the market was looking quite expensive by traditional standards. And after that, the Nifty has gained 74%. So, yeah. After that, the Nifty has gained 74%. So, what I would advise is that keep a minimum allocation for equities in your portfolio that you will not exit. So today, if you feel the market is very overheated and you're comfortable with, say, a 75% equity allocation, just keep it at 75. Anything over that you can book, or you can slightly reduce that allocation and say, okay, only 50% of my money will be in equities, rest I'll park in bonds, and you book out the profit on that extra portion. But don't book profit on everything is what I will say, because there are two things. First thing is, we don't know if this is the market top. The market top may be tomorrow or it may be 2 years later. The other thing is, once you've exited, re-entry is an even more difficult decision, because after the market crashes 20%, 25%, you don't know if the correction is over. So if you look at this March itself, many investors made the mistake of not re-entering because they got further crashes in the offing, right? So that's why I feel it is a difficult thing to do. So do this partially and not fully on your portfolio. Yeah, Vidya, on to the next one.
Yes. Yes, Aarti. So the next question, what are the filters? This is from Jamneshwar. He's asked, what are the filters that we can use for picking a stock? Management quality, PE, EPS, cash flow from operating activities to net profit comparison. Yes, Jamneshwar, I mean, using filters, now that, we at Prime Investor too, we have tools to use filters. You could definitely look at those. But the first thing that you need to keep in mind is you need to use the right tools for the right sectors or the right companies, right? So, for example, you cannot be valuing a bank based on just their operating profit or their price to earnings and so on. You need an entirely different, you need to know the net interest margin or the net interest income of a bank and so on, right? So that is where, using some of the tools that we have might help you. I am just going to share here my screen. You can see that we have a stock screener with, I don't know if many of you have used these screeners, but just to give you a quick gist, we have various parameters to kind of split the filters, the metrics that you will typically look at. We have the growth parameters, which would typically consist of your sales and your profits and your EBITDA, your operating cash flow, which is a very key thing. And all the margins and so on. And as you will see, one of the unique things about our filters is that we also provide separately for banks. So if you're trying to look at banks, then you would look at some of the NII, NIM and so on, net interest income and so on. Now, these are the growth metrics. So to make it easier, we have split it. Most of the P&L items will come under growth metrics. Then there is quality metric, which is about the quality of your balance sheet. You would have, the typical ROE or ROCE or debt equity, interest coverage. And for banks, very importantly, this is really rich data for you because otherwise you would have to collate it individually from annual reports, the gross NPA, the net NPA, the loan book, and so on. And some of the parameters, in fact, some of you mentioned on the chat, like operating cash flow to EBITDA, end of the day, it's very, very important to know that whether the profit really translates into cash, right? And that's where operating cash flow. But how to use operating cash flow is a very, different thing altogether. And that's where we have tried to come up with the right metrics for you to do this. Operating cash flow, number of years over which a company is positive on its operating cash flow, the cash conversion cycle, which is very, very important, so you take your your debtor days and your creditor days and your inventory days and see the overall cycle. But there again, for a finance company or for a bank company, you wouldn't use it. Dividend ratio for the bank, for instance, you have your CASA and CAR, and then you have the valuation metrics. You can all go through it in detail. We also have things like promoter pledge, which will also, you spoke about quality, promoter pledging, etc. would be a classic case to understand quality, whether MFs are holding, because it gives you some comfort that mutual funds will look for basic filters before holding it, right? So this is also another, metric. And please remember, you can actually export all of these into an Excel and, at leisure, do your own selection, do your own. And there are other metrics that you can use if you're slightly interested in, trying to know the price, whether it's low or high. You have things like 52-week low, high, etc. If you're not very, if you don't want to go on adding every single filter, we have some ready-made filters also here. You can start using it. Start with, for example, you can start with, say, a rising ROE. A company with a rising ROE is a very positive sign. I have done that here, and you see 261 companies. On top of it, you can add more metrics. The filters that, I just discussed can be added on top of it to further narrow your filter. When you do this, you can, in fact, check. For example, you want to restrict yourself to few sectors, you can do that. Or you want to create your own stock list and, save them, you can do that. Here again, you can export all of these and, make your own decisions. So that's something that we are offering because many of you here are DIY investors, and we want to ensure that, you get to do your own research also. But it's such a vast, subject, and we want to condense it into relevant metrics that you need to look at. So that's the whole idea. So that's the question. I am going to move on to the next question here. This is from Ajay again. So he says, my SEBI RA advisor insists on not investing in direct stocks. He suggests things like index funds, etc. only. How do you suggest I convince him that prime stocks are worth investing, as they are well researched and are relatively conservative bets? So I'll take this question, Ajay. Maybe your advisor knows you better, and it's possible that he feels that you may not be able to, handle the volatility of stocks. So you need to, it's not just about the quality of research you receive from us, but your own investment behavior and your own response to the research that you get, right? Yeah. So assess your own risk profile to understand if you can take, say, a hit like we saw in 2008, something like a 50-60% fall, So is that something up your alley, and would you be able to handle it? Is your portfolio diversified enough otherwise, or are you already excessively into equity mutual funds, and whether you can take on more of stocks? So these are questions that you answer yourself best. And if you do, then you probably, would like to show him what Prime Stocks is about, show the philosophy. We have the link to the philosophy in the Prime Stocks page. Just understand, he can understand the philosophy and see if, that is convincing enough, and whether your investment behavior would, allow you to take those risks. So with that, I'll
repeat that answer. They couldn't listen.
People were saying they couldn't. Hello? People were saying they couldn't hear me earlier. I think I was muted. Let me repeat that reply. Somebody asked, how should I invest in the stock portfolio? Should I actually invest the surplus over and above what I have invested in mutual funds? When I get a bonus or other windfall from the employer, should I deploy that money? So my reply was that the surplus that you have over and above your MF investments, you can put it in direct stocks, provided you have bond investments, your asset allocation is taken care of, and you have basic protection in terms of insurance and things like that. As to the question or investing bonuses or one-off things, I would say when you get a bonus from your employer, that may not be an ideal time in the market for you to invest, or the stock that you prefer may not be available at a good valuation or price at that time. Therefore, it would be better actually for you to keep that money in a debt fund or other liquid avenue, so that later when the opportunity comes, you can invest. It is best not to just deploy it in one go.
Right, Aarti. So the next question is a single line, but not a easy answer. So I'm going to leave that to you. From Binu Peter, is market currently overvalued?
See, the problem is I've been feeling the market is overvalued for at least the last 2 years from 2019. But I've been quite wrong about it. The reason I've been feeling markets are overvalued is not even going by the PE number alone, but by the fact that from 2008 to 2018 or 19, actually the earnings growth in the market has been very muted. It has been only 5 to 6% that the companies have delivered. And I do believe that stock prices do catch up with fundamentals at one time or another. But as a counter to that, the problem is that globally, there has been so much liquidity during this period due to the central bank stimulus, zero interest rates, etc., that the traditional valuation metrics have not worked in this period. So, at what point will these valuation metrics start working? We don't know. Now, currently, even as we speak, this week we saw a huge spike in the US bond yields, and that caused a panic in stock markets around the world. So, these valuations may seem okay if interest rates are close to zero, but if interest rates start to revert to normal levels as economies bounce back from COVID, I think the valuations will begin to look expensive. The second aspect is that in India, actually, since September, we have been seeing a strong pickup in the earnings of companies. So, in the PE, for the PE to get cheap, it is not only the numerator that needs to go down, the denominator also can go up, right? So, I do think some amount of earnings bounce back will come in. But even if that happens, actually by traditional parameters, the market is quite expensive. So this would argue for keeping your equity allocations at the lower end of whatever band you preferred. So not going to zero, but at least not going overboard on it. The other thing I would advise is, because I do feel markets are expensive, if you need any money for within 3 to 5 years from here, better to take it out of the market and not to keep stay invested in the market.
Right, Aarti. So just to add to what Aarti said, the importance of keeping some cash. At Prime Investor, we are also trying to work on a tool that will help you based on market conditions. That's not based on your portfolio, but based on market conditions. What's the kind of cash component that is desired? You know, if we do think the valuations are at a high, what proportion should you keep in cash, and what proportion should remain deployed in equity? So that's something that you can use as a guide based on your own requirement also, like she said, the money needed over the next 3 to 5 years, etc. This tool will essentially use various indicators, and we are in the process of still building those indicators because we need to backtest and see if it works across market conditions, which will give us alerts on when the market is getting overvalued based on some quantitative and qualitative metrics. And that will probably, hopefully help you make these decisions in a more informed manner. I'll take the next question from Lakshmi Narayanan. What's the criteria followed for recommendations in prime stocks? Will it be above certain market cap? Do you share contrarian bets? So the criteria we had discussed in detail in our stock philosophy. You can go through it. Like I showed in our screener a while ago, we split our initial filtering criteria based on growth, quality, valuation, and other qualitative metrics, on management, governance, and things like that. That's the first level of filtering that we try to do. But even before that, like you rightly asked, yes, we at this juncture are we use two gating criteria. That is the liquidity of the stock, which is very important to us because that's where many retail investors get stuck after a bull market, and when a crash happens, inability to sell stocks. So we do have liquidity criteria. We have only picked stocks above a certain threshold. That is again a moving target based on market conditions. Similarly, market cap at this point in time, it's Nifty 500. So that would mean, MCAP of over around 1,300, 1,400 crore will only find a place in our universe itself. And then the filters are applied to further narrow the universe. Do you share contrarian bets? Yes, of course. Since you're all subscribers here, I'm sure you would have had access to our prime stocks, and you would have seen stocks like Engineers India or Mahanagar Gas. They are definitely contrarian bets. They are not completely stocks that one would pick at this stage. But yes, what we try to do there is have a mix of what we think is value and what we think will insulate your portfolio, and also those stocks that will offer growth. So with that, I'll go to the next question. When markets fall steep across board, like what happened in March 20, it usually reflects a change in fundamental business environment. How to make the choice of investing in a stock in the watch list basis the old context, Aarti?
Yeah. So if our stock remains on a watch list even during crashes, it means that the fundamental thesis has not changed for the stock. And usually those stock markets do follow, prices do follow fundamentals in the long term. In the short run, they go through extreme reactions which are not totally fundamentally driven. So fundamentally speaking, actually, if you see in the last 5-6 years, earnings growth not being there, the stock market should not have gone up at all. But we did have this long bull market. In March, actually, the whole catch up happened because people suddenly got worried about earnings after COVID. So the markets corrected by 30% all at once, right? So the markets have mood swings which are very much like a pendulum. They go through extremes. So those offer opportunities for us to buy or sell stocks at the right inflection point. So it is not that the stock price movements are timed exactly to changes in fundamentals. They can happen before changes in fundamentals or after changes in fundamentals, and therefore you get this opportunity to buy or sell.
Right, Aarti. So the next question, it's interesting. all these styles perform in different phases of a cycle. Why not switch the style and make the maximum of all phases of a market cycle? So that's from Ajay again. That's true. If only we knew which phases worked when, it's very easy to switch. It's like essentially identifying winners, right? So can we be sure that we'll identify winners every single time? Do we know when value starts? I mean, last year, for instance, when everybody had given up on value per se for years of underperformance, like Aarti was saying, some of the value funds, suddenly picked up and started performing. So that's the whole puzzle in the entire investing universe, right? You do not know when cycles switch. Are some of the quality stocks that we have seen for several years in the capital goods and engineering space, which did continue to deliver, were completely out of favor in the market. So those who thought there was value and moved to these stocks couldn't really they could hold for 4 or 5 years without returns, and they exited it, and then you see these stocks going up. So the idea essentially is to diversify, because you do not know which styles perform in which phase. That's why when we build a mutual fund portfolio, if you notice in our prime funds, at all times we constantly strive to give a mix of growth and value and quality and focused and diversified and so on, simply because we cannot be sure that this is the beginning of a certain cycle. I think the same applies to stocks as well. I'll now go to the next question. How often should we monitor portfolio? How many stocks? I think we addressed it, but how many stocks should be in portfolio for monitoring? What portion of your wealth should be in stocks? Aarti, please.
This how often to monitor is a very tricky question. See, ideally, you should monitor your portfolio once every month or so, I found, with direct stocks. But with stocks, you can never say when a regulatory risk or a governance risk suddenly crops up, which substantially affects the stock that you're holding. In fact, this is why we advocate a somewhat compact portfolio, and also made that point about the time you need to maintain a direct stock portfolio. So it will be useful to actually set up alerts on all the stocks that you own in your portfolio. Now, don't track their price on a daily basis, but if there are events or corporate actions affecting those stocks, stock exchange filings, those things you do have to keep track of, because suddenly Indian companies are known to throw sudden googlies at you, which usually come in the form of some governance problem, and the stock can tank quite sharply when such things happen. So I think for that reason, it is necessary to have a alert-based system to keep a watch on corporate actions. Tracking the prices and returns, you can do it once a month or even once a quarter. It's not going to majorly affect your overall returns in the long run.
Yes, Aarti. So the next question from Kalpesh. What do people who how do people who have jobs do to learn and apply the concepts? Does this not take near full-time efforts? Your thoughts, please. Right, Kalpesh, as Aarti mentioned at the very beginning, it does take a lot of effort to identify your stocks and maintain your portfolio, etc. Yes, you can rely to some extent on credible research, but that does not absolve the responsibility, your own responsibility of kind of maintaining that portfolio. See what suits you, how much risk you can take, and so on. And in the absence of that, like Aarti mentioned, it is best to stick to a portfolio of mutual funds or index funds. The other question from Girish is who, on the other hand, would like to try his hand at stocks. He wants to know, can you arrange a training program on how to use your screener? Yes, definitely. We are going to use a video. The first instance, we are going to have a video giving you a demo of how our screener will be used. I will be taking you through those individual screeners with examples on what screeners you can use for what purpose, and I hope that will be of use to you, and you will be able to filter your own stocks and basically narrow your universe, right? So we will definitely do that. And apart from that, how to abstract out all this complexity. He says he's asked whether we would help. Yes. All our content, essentially, the idea of, Aarti has written a series of at least 5 articles on the stock building a stock portfolio, number of stocks, how to book profits, or cut losses and so on. These, you will have to probably kind of go through time and again and try and apply it to your own portfolio and see how it works. It's going to be a long work in progress, but yeah, we have all been doing it, and hopefully you'll get there. I will take the other question. Okay, so Aarti, this is for you. Using Prime Investor stock recommendations along with Prime funds, what should be the percentage deployment in stocks? So Aarti, perhaps, you can also share your own experience on how you go about deciding what allocation you have to mutual funds and to stocks.
Yeah. So the approach I took basically with my own portfolio is that the times whenever I was actually had a very tough time in my personal life or in my job where I had very little time to spare to track markets. In those periods, I almost owned a fully mutual fund portfolio only for my equity exposures. I did used to buy some thematic funds, etc., based on what I felt about markets. But in those times, I stuck mostly to mutual funds. The stock portfolio has been acquired over many years and very gradually. And when you find more time, you can research some stocks and add to it. But typically, I would say decide on the mix between your mutual fund and your stock portfolio based on your risk profile and the time you can devote. If you can devote very little time, perhaps only 25% of your equity portfolio should be in your personal name. It should be a direct stock portfolio. 75% can be via mutual funds. So for me right now, I think my direct stock portfolio is about 1/3 of my MF portfolio, and frankly, in the last 1 year, I found it has been outperforming the MF portfolio because I found that these MFs are all concentrated in a set of large cap names and quality names, etc. And there are a lot of under researched opportunities outside of that one can identify. So I think the proportion should be maybe you can start with a 75-25 kind of thing where 75% is mutual funds. And if you find that you're able to outperform them, then you try to add to your stock portfolio. If you find your stock portfolio is not doing better than MFs, then why spend so much time and effort actually managing a direct stock portfolio? It is better you stick with mutual funds itself. And Vidya, there are a lot of questions on this rising rates and what they mean for stocks. Could I just take one right now? Yeah. So I see a lot of people asking this rise in yields, why does it affect stock prices? How does it affect stock prices and so on? So basically, if you go into the theory of it, stock valuations are decided on the basis of an expected return from equities, right? And the expected return that you want to generate from a particular stock is pegged to the risk-free rate in the market. That is, to put it very simply, as an investor today, suppose an RBI floating rate bond can give me 7.15%. I should take the time and effort and risk of investing in stocks only if stocks can give me say 3% over the GOI rate, right? So if I'm happy with the 7% return, there's no need for me to invest in stocks. So as interest rates in the economy go up, the bar that stocks need to outperform, that keeps going up. So suppose this GOI floating rate bond, because interest rates are going up, tomorrow the government starts to offer 9% on it. This is a extreme case, but I'm just saying it. Suppose it starts to offer 9%. So from my equity investments, I will then expect a return of at least 13-14%, right? As a substantial premium over this. This means that the valuation at which I buy stocks initially, that has to be pretty low. And this is why people will not buy stocks at high valuations if interest rates are rising. So a second reason is that a lot of stock price performance in India is actually driven by FII investments. All of you know that. So the reason why FIIs have been pouring money into India over the last 5-6 years, irrespective of all political events and COVID, etc., is that they are able to borrow money in the home markets like US or Europe at near zero rates, right? Rates are zero or even negative in some of these Western economies. So many FPIs have access to very low cost money there, and they are able to bring it to the emerging markets and actually deploy it here. Therefore, their return expectations from stocks here are also not very high because they are getting money practically at zero cost, right? The only thing they have to budget for is the exchange rate and the stock price return. So the moment interest rates in the US or elsewhere start going up, it means the cost of money for these FII investors to borrow and invest in other markets, that also goes up. So these are two key ways in which rising yields actually make it less attractive to own equities. And this is also a key reason why if we see a sharp rise in the yield, you will see a sharp correction in the stock market, because all these justifications that have been given for the market valuation to be at 34 times or 35 times, that will start to erode a bit if the yield starts to go up. So this is definitely a risk that we people should watch out for, because it could be a trigger to a correction.
Right, Aarti. So back to questions. One from Dinesh on what is the frequency of stock recommendations that's provided by Prime Investor? Current list of recommendations has been since Jan 2021. Right. So many of you used to stock newsletters may assume that we will be coming out with 2 or 3 recommendations a month and so on. At Prime Investor, there is no frequency to the recommendations. We just add as and when we find opportunities, and we keep track of them. There are also 2 tabs, if you noticed, of hold and also sell, and there is a watch list. So our process is, if we think we have identified good candidates and at the right time, we will simply add it to our buy and also give you alert of you will receive a mailer on the stock added. So there is no such compulsion, or there is there's no such thing as adding 2 stocks every month, etc. You will get your alert, so you will know. The other question is from Sanal. Can we use prime stocks as a diversified portfolio? And how can we percentage allocate each prime stock? Prime stocks per se, we try to be as diversified as possible in the stock selection. But as mentioned in our philosophy, we do just look at opportunities, across sectors, and where we find them to be good, we pick them. So end of the day, it's largely bottom-up stock picking, although we do keep in mind the prospects of sectors when we do that. So in our own, allocation, just to give you an example, you will see a mix of value and a mix of growth and quality. I mean, you will see stocks like, Galaxy, Surfextents, which are probably growth, or Hero MotoCorp, which qualify as growth, whereas at this point in time, an Infosys or Engineers India will qualify as a value, and then you have quality ones like HDFC and so on. So there is a mix; it is diversified. But percentage allocation, like we mentioned in our philosophy, it's not something that we can get you to do, because we think it's largely personalized based on what you may be holding already, how your your fund portfolio looks like, etc. So it's very hard for us to literally tell you, and that's where building a portfolio like it would be with small case, although it's the easiest thing to do, for a very diversified, full-fledged portfolio, the allocation is not something that we should set. But please read Aarti's articles on this, on allocation, on how you can cap individual allocation, etc. That will give you some idea on how you can go about, allocating the stocks that are already there in your fund portfolio, stocks that you may already hold, sectors that you may already be overweight on, you might want to avoid. For example, if you already hold a good proportion of IT, there may not be any need for you to add another IT stock from prime stocks, right? So those are the kind of nuances that you might have to keep in mind. So I'll go to the other question from Parashuram, again related to mutual fund and equity. In where we invest both in MF and direct equity, how to avoid overlap? Would it be right to ignore the top 20 holding of your combined mutual fund portfolio and make a watch list outside of the top 20 MF holding? Aarti, can you take that question? Yes, I'll repeat it. In case you invest both in MF and direct equity, how to avoid overlap? Should I ignore the top 20 holdings of the combined mutual fund portfolio and make a watch list outside of the top 20 in my mutual fund portfolio?
Yeah, it does make sense to do that. So many of these platforms through which you invest in mutual funds, they offer you this feature of being able to deep dive into your MF holdings, where you're able to identify the top holdings aggregated across your mutual fund portfolios. Once you do that, you will know which are the stocks to which you have top exposures, and definitely if you can identify the top, no need to go even down to 20. If you see the top 5 or 10 stocks itself will occupy a very large weight in your portfolio, and definitely you can avoid them and look for your picks outside of those.
Thanks, Aarti. I'll probably, close this with the last question, because we are nearing our, timeline. This is from Ravi Shankar. I'd like to benefit from electric vehicles or solar energy, which will be the future trend. Which sector or subsector should I look at? So, Ravi Shankar, so the thing is, many companies which are into diversified businesses see such opportunities and try to enter these businesses. So, there will be segments of their business at this juncture and not make up for their entire business. In other words, it's hard for you to simply get into certain sector or subsector to look for it. The best way to do it is to keep track of news. There may be an automobile company showing interest in electric vehicles, or completely, not completely, partly unrelated. Like, for example, a company like Greaves Cotton, which has, been trying to inorganically grow into the EV segment as well. Similarly, with solar energy, you will find many players in broad capital goods or other diversified businesses getting into solar. So, the best way to keep track of them is to ensure that you track the company news on media and try to identify opportunities. So largely, I think we have covered a good number of questions. With this, I think we'll come to the end of our program. From many of your questions, I think many of you are interested in doing your own research, doing your own, building your own portfolio. And we hope that we will be able to help you with it by building more intelligent tools. We hope to actually have a session, if possible, exclusively to help you understand how to use our screener effectively. The difference between our screener and the many other screeners that you will find, not many, maybe a couple of screeners that you'll find in the market, is that we have tried to cut out the clutter. We have tried to remove many of the metrics that you may not need to see at this stage to narrow. And they may not make sense also for, what you are particularly looking at. So we have tried to reduce the amount of information that you'll have to sift through and stick to the most relevant ones. And over time, I'm sure, you'll also be able to make judgmental calls on what metrics work well, where an EV by EBITDA will work well, where a PE has to be looked at, and so on. So this is something that is work in progress, and we hope to equip you well on those fronts. There was also one question on building a mutual fund tool for you to analyze. That's also in the works. So please be assured that you will also be able to do your own, kind of research on it. So the idea in all of this is to equip you, whether you're with an advisor or by yourself, to equip you with the right tools to make an informed decisions, while of course, constantly having our support and, our, tools on for you to work on. So with that, I think Shrikant, closing comments.
Yeah, thank you, Vidya. Thank you, Aarti and Vidya, for conducting the session and for moderating the QA part of it as well. Thank you very much. Just a couple of bookkeeping programming notes. The recording of this webinar is scheduled to arrive at your mailboxes by today evening, by 4 or 5 o'clock. That is what I have set it up as. I hope it works. If it does not work, there are backup possibilities. You can always write to us and we'll be able to provide you the webinar recording. So rest assured, it will be made available. And there are many questions. We couldn't, for the lack of time, answer some of those questions. And Aarti has graciously agreed to do a QA about the questions that were left unanswered. Take some of them and do a short QA-like article in our website. Please look out for that when that comes around as well. And there are many topics like this that we can do a webinar on. Vidya suggested doing one on a screener itself, the screener that we have on our platform. That would be fantastic. That would be very useful. We also will do a demo for that. And in general, we plan to augment our platform, our offering, with a lot more tools. I mean, we have recommendations, we have content, and we have tools, right? Right now, we are very strong on recommendations and content, and we have a couple of tools, but not as many as we would like to have. So we definitely want to augment that part of our website as well. Please look forward to that. With these closing words, Aarti, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to thank everybody for making it, and I did find
Thank you.
many. Yeah.
Yeah, please continue, Aarti. I mean,
No, I just found many intriguing questions in the panel, so I'll be answering them there. Thank you.
exactly. Thank you, and thank you very much for taking time off your Saturday morning to be with us. And I hope this session was of some use to you guys. Thank you very much.